So now we're going to talk about adding godets into our skirts. And a godet is literally just a piece of fabric that's inserted into a skirt to add more fullness onto the hem. Usually they're triangular because you're working up to a point here. These ones are a bit simpler because you have a seam line. So it's if I do that, you can see that it's just the A-line skirt pattern that we made before, and we've just picked a point where we're inserting this quarter circle of fullness into the hem here. So all we need to do to do that is we need to work out on the body where the insertion's going to be. On here, this is probably about 5 centimeters below the hip. So all we need to do is find that point on our pattern piece here.
And remembering this is half scale.
Yeah, this is half scale. So yeah, 5 centimeters down from the hip line. And because we've got a notch there now, we probably don't need that hip notch. So you could either get rid of it, you could add another one in between if you wanted to, but it's only 25 centimeters, so it's not too long a way to get lost. So then we just need that point there, so that notch indicates the point where the godet starts. And from that point we measure down. So this ended up being 10.25 in half scale, so that's 20.5 in full scale. But that's all right, so because we're just using that measurement. So 20.5, we need to make the godet. So that's the only measurement you need to make the godet. So we literally draw a line, draw the top, draw the length, draw a right angle out here, and then we're going to create you really should have measured up from the hem. This is a very fiddly measurement to be working with, but in full scale it would be easier. Oop. So there's our quarter circle. And then we need to, this one here, this pattern here doesn't have a hem allowance on it. You can see, so it just matches at that point and goes down to there. So I'm not going to add a hem there at the moment, but for this I will show you a bit later about hemming these sort of garments. And then we need, because this has to sew onto this. So this is the stitch line at the moment. This is the stitch line. So we need to add a seam allowance on both sides here. Now, what I'd probably do here is, for our grain line, I think it's probably easier if you, rather than, because you could be tempted to put a grain line down the middle, but that means that then these two seams go off onto the bias. So I'd keep them on the straight grain. So what I'd probably do is just make one of, let's just draw one in.
It'll be easier to sew in when it stretches.
Yeah, exactly. So a grain line this way. And so this is actually, like, this is the grain line here. So this does go off slightly, but it should be much easier to sew these two together rather than, if you had the angle down here and then that would be on the bias, so that would stretch as you're trying to sew it onto this, rather flat grain line here. So Yep, so there's our pattern piece really. And there'll be a video that we'll do of how to insert the godet into the skirt hem as well. Now that's our quarter circle godet. Now for the other side here, this is actually a half circle godet. And the thing with this, I think with godets sometimes it gets to the point where you're actually, like, you're not really getting much more bang for your buck. So, like, I think...
If it was longer though, you would.
Yeah, true. I think what annoyed me about this is that the method of sewing this in is actually harder than sewing in this one here, and you'll see that in the sewing videos. I'll still do both of them, but yeah.
And in a light fabric it would be different as well.
True, and it could be, yeah, exactly, that you use, if this was the outside fabric and then this was like a cotton lawn or something, you would get a much softer, swing into the hem of that. And that's literally just this doubled, so you would measure a line. And then over here, so this is this measurement here, you can see, and that measurement there. So we'll actually go that way and then down the other side that way. And then with this one here, you can do the same thing. So you mark this down and then you measure, you measure all the way along there, and rather than having to do that and then on this side again, once you've got one side done, you could fold along that line, trace out the other side, fold along that line, cut out this edge, fold it, and then just trace it off on the other side, so you don't have to go around each way there. And then you would just need to add seam allowance along the top edge. And then whatever hem you're adding to the bottom, that's the next stage. And so this center notch here is the notch that lines up with this one here. This is a half circle. You could, if you really wanted to, you could do a three-quarter circle, so you'd actually come around to here. But yeah, I really think this is certainly enough fullness to add in. So there are our godets there. Now we'll just talk about the ones that we've got on the back here. So these ones here, this is adding on the fullness. So you can see here, you can see that. So the pattern piece comes down and then it comes around, and there's no seam from that point down to the hem. It's just one panel, and then the centerpiece is actually, yeah. So this would be, to do it this way, you would say, you would make this as your pattern and you would cut 6 of those. And you could, because it's symmetrical, you could pair it, so you could flip it on your fabric or cut 2 layers together as one. The problem with this though, or you could do this one actually is flat on this side seam, so that means it would be asymmetrical, so you would have to do, you could do pairs, do the same on the other side, but then you'd have to have this as one pattern piece and this as another pattern piece.
If we don't have 6 gauze all the same on this,
yeah, it's because this is just a trial to show you the techniques. So the problem with this though is that when you get to this point, you actually have to cut in. So this is the pattern piece here. This is in full scale, and you can see this point here is that point there, and you can actually see, can you, Libby, that when you come in, you can see there's a tiny little fray spot there, because I've had to clip in right to the stitch line. So I've got 2 of these, one on top of the other. I've sewn down, turned the corner, and then come out here, and then I've had to clip into this, right into this corner here, so that this could open up. If I didn't do that, this wouldn't, if I stitched it like that, this here wouldn't sit down like this. It would actually sort of just sit to the inside. So you'd have this very funny pulling coming from here, because that needs to open up and drop down, and it can't because of that angle. So by not clipping in there, you're really distorting the shape here. And it may actually work out interesting as a design feature. I've never done it. It's one of those things that you sort of just know is wrong, but it is something that potentially you could play with. The other thing you could do, if you definitely didn't want to clip in and you really wanted that to stick out, is that you could actually have the seam allowance on the outside of the garment. And then that means that you don't have to clip into that point, but then you'd have to think about some way of finishing this edge. Like, you wouldn't just have it overlocked on the outside, so you have to do some sort of binding.
Or
And
it
then
may be a non-frayed fabric that you use that doesn't need.
oh, that's true. Like if it was a felt or a vinyl or something like that. Yeah, Libby, exactly. It could sit out.
With that plastic stuff. Someone did something like that last year. So.
Yeah. So we actually, I've actually got on the inside of this one 2 different methods that I've used of covering that up. Because you're going to have a raw, because you clip right into that point, that's a very weak point. So with this one, I've actually added, you can see another piece of fabric there.
Oh, yeah.
So it sews over the top.
It's actually
And
really
so
hard to see.
Maybe this is something, like we'll do it, we can do a sewing video of this.
Yeah.
So it'll probably be easier to see in
Yeah.
that sewing video. So that one's just got a strip there. And then on the other side here, I've done another version where it's actually like a bound corner.
Yeah.
And so this piece here
Let's see
is
that
actually that piece there. So you can see that it's a reflection of that corner. Actually, if you look at it that way.
So you cut a piece shaped like that and then just
Yeah,
stitch
and then
around.
stitched it on and folded it and then folded it again. So this piece here is the same as that. So, but 1, 2, 3, 4 times the width of the seam allowance, so that I can really bind that corner.
You could also put a bit of fusing.
Yep, that would help, but I still think you would end, even with fusing, you would still end up with a very weak point where you've clipped in. This one looks better. I've obviously clipped in a little bit less than on the other side, so there's no little fraying bits happening there. So that's just something you have to deal with if you want to use this this technique. That's just something to be aware of. And so this is, again, very easy. Well, basically it's just getting, if I got this shape, because that's half scale of that, and then I did, where are we? Here, yeah. So I literally, if I glued that onto that, that's all I've done.
Yeah.
So to do this piece though, to create this, you would literally just, do half of a side here. Because you'd do one side and then you'd flip it over, cut it out and then flip it over and then trace off the other side. Now remember that point there, actually that's where it comes out from. And again, these are all design decisions that you're making. How big the godet is, where it starts, where it stops, what shape it is, all of that sort of stuff. So what I did here for this big one, actually if I turn it around this way, so that's the big version of what I'm doing here, and this center line is the center line here, so that's our grain line. And then from this point here, I came out at a right angle. And I know that I'm running over the top of this, but then it would be a matter of just drawing in this curve. So measure down to there, measure from this point here down to there, and then from that point out to there, and then draw in your semicircle here, and then you would get this here. And again, that's a quarter circle that I've added in. So when you add two of those together, the fullness that you add in is actually like a half circle.
Yeah.
But if you took this in half, so if you just folded, folded this back, halfway, and then added a seam allowance there, then with the one on the other side, you would only get a quarter circle added into the fullness. So just something else that's a bit fun to play with.